Everyone, happy Friday. If you are watching this live, good day. If you are watching the replay, I haven't done one of these in a while. If you don't recall who I am or you're just tuning in for the first time, I am Jevon Wooden, and I am a leadership and workplace culture advisor. My company is Bright Mind Consulting Group, and if you know now, I always bring a special guest. And today I have Eric with me. I'm going to let Eric introduce himself better than I can. So go ahead, Eric. Tell people who you are and why our topic of succession planning is important for you.
Yeah, Javon, thank you so much for having me today. So I'm a manager of optimization for LGG Industrial, and that means it means a lot of things and kind of whatever the organization needs, right? But I've built my career in talent acquisitions, people strategy, learning and development space, right? And when we talk about succession planning, I think we as workplace employers or consultants are in a position where we don't have the luxury of not looking at succession planning, right? We talk about, on average, people are staying within a company about 3 years. And regardless of, or whether you want to take a look at succession planning generally and say, we need to have a backup for every position in the company, or you want to start with a critical role analysis of who are the people, what are the positions within our company that if they were vacant would negatively impact the organization, and who do we have that could potentially step into those roles. um, we're at a place in the market and employment where you don't have the luxury of not having successors.
Absolutely. You said something in there, Eric. You mentioned having a succession plan for every role. And I'm going to be honest, I really don't see that in a lot of the organizations I have worked with. And that's where the issues start to begin. The biggest talent pool is at the lower levels, right? But they don't start getting
Right.
developed until they finally hit like manager and above. So we run into trouble there. So tell me a little bit about how you and your organization is focusing on talent everywhere with the succession planning.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's got a couple of pronged approach, right? There's very rarely is there a one size fits all, right? So my company does some pretty technical manufacturing. So there are very specific needs that we have within an organization of um, trade knowledge, right? Welders who do one very specific thing, but without that specific thing, we don't have a product,
Mm.
right? Key customer relationships, and then also broadly, especially as we talk about new generations entering the workforce, we see them asking for very high levels of development and engagement, right? And they want to see kind of a timeline of closer wins or something that they can hang on to and say, okay, yeah, that was a development. Yes, I've checked that box. So when we at LGG look at succession planning, we started with a critical role analysis, right? What are the positions within the organization that if we didn't have filled would negatively impact us? And then we look at the entire population of who are those successors, right? And then broadly, how do we use succession planning as a tool to increase engagement and job satisfaction? Right. So one, as we're looking at our full population as for potential successors to critical roles, how do we use this work to really say, okay, well, we have all of these high potential individuals. How do we help to move them forward in development in their careers within the organization and move the mark on engagement and job satisfaction? So we're using this couple multi-pronged approach to the same work.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And I know some folks listening are like, okay, we've attempted to do this and we've done the critical role analysis. We've looked at, the talent that we have within the organizations. We've identified gaps. The issue is finding the talent, right? That's what I hear constantly. So what
Mhm.
is how do you all approach identifying the talent well before you even need that talent?
Yeah, great. So as part of that process, I created really templates for the critical role itself and for high potential and successors, right? And I broke that down into really a skills and behavioral focus, right? Because we're looking at trainability, right? What
Mhm.
can be trained within the role needs and from a people perspective. So then you do a huge gap analysis. This is a big lift, right? And then from a talent perspective, it's real conversations, right? Succession planning is not quick or easy
Right.
overall, right? And it takes highly engaged leaders to really have the real conversations. And I hate to keep using the word critical, but that is what this work is, right? Um, and what I see is a lot of organizations, if they've had really good recruiting and hiring practices, mostly the talent does exist within their organization. But maybe we've been having the wrong conversations to identify
You said a word, the wrong conversations.
that.
And the reason why that resonated with me, Eric, is one, you mentioned that succession planning is not fast work. And I feel like many organizations are so reactive. They're like, oh no, we have a problem. Let's patch it really quickly, right? And then they put someone in a role that maybe they didn't even want to move up. Maybe they didn't want that role, but now they feel forced because if they don't take it, their job may be at risk. So how do we have the proper conversations to ensure that we're not just arbitrarily thinking, okay, the natural next step for this person is moving into this position, and ensuring that they are the right person and they actually want to be that successor?
Yeah, for sure. And I think sometimes it's a both and, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've got to, great, there's an organizational need that is now, right? So we have to put someone in that role. And for whatever reason, you maybe identify someone. And I think sometimes, and our job as employers is not to put someone in a role and leave them, right? That's part of this plan and strategy around succession is great. We've put you in this role for a reason. And then the work begins, right? From a tactical standpoint, as we need this person to execute, but also we as an employer, our work begins in coaching and developing them. Because I think there's a long history and culture of you promote the person who's been there or the most
Mm-hmm.
technical expert. Well, from a talent development standpoint, you put someone in a new role and they now have a breadth of new skills and knowledge to learn, right?
Absolutely.
And that's where many organizations stop, right? And then they turn around 5 years later and they go, why didn't that person work out? I'm like, well, because we didn't do anything.
You left them. You put them
Right,
in there and left them there.
right.
There.
I'm very involved in talent management. When we look at uh, annual performance reviews, right? Maybe most organizations use like a 0 to 5 scale, or many do, right? And so maybe someone has historically been a 4, right? They're exceeding expectations. You promote them, that person should go back to being a 3, technically, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because they were a 4 in their past role. They have stuff to learn in that newly promoted role. And that's, I think, a shift in thinking that organizations need to make
Mm.
is new role, new ratings, new role, new things to learn, right?
I love that perspective, Eric. And it reminds me of the military. So before we ever promoted anyone, if you're a high potential, whatever, you had to go through training first. We had to give you a very pronounced, like, hey, you've been tapped. You've said yes to this. You've done your promotion packet, whatever you did to get this next role. So we know you're interested, and we're interested in you. But before we even put you in there, we're going to make sure you have ample amount of learning. We're going to make sure you do what we call the left seat, right seat. If there's someone else in that position, so you can talk to them, understand what they've done, get their purview and insight, kind of get to know the team a little bit before you have to formally make decisions. And then you also had to make sure that when you got into that role, you did start over. You started fresh. And
Yeah.
then we had a whole nother performance rating based on your new role. But it never was that you were insufficient. It was, hey, this is also for us to mark what you need to learn, how we can support support you as well
Yeah.
and keep track of that. Because a lot of times in organizations and talent development, especially, we have a lot of things on our mind and on our plate and on our dashboards and
Yeah.
all these other things. So it's really hard to say, hey, we've tapped you for this role. Let's not forget about you. Let's make sure we get you in this training for 6 months from
Yeah.
now or whatever. So I think that you're hitting a lot of the opponents and pain points that I'm seeing in
Yeah.
organizations, and it's not intentional, right? That this is happening.
Right. Yeah. You said something interesting about it's not a deficiency.
Hmm.
And that it requires, I think, a really specific company culture to identify and have those really transparent conversations that aren't tied to value or judgment. And
Mm.
it's just, this is a gap from where you are today and tomorrow. We all have gaps, right? And it's through really looking at them honestly that you make real leaders and you make successors, right? And so just interesting that you say
No,
that. Yeah.
serious. I mean that this is a part of successful succession planning.
Right.
Understanding growth opportunities, understanding what the organization may need, having that foresight in that positioning. So, tell me a little bit about how your organization kind of, and you specifically, looks at and kind of plans that. I know you do the critical role analysis and everything else. How do you identify, exactly what's happening in the future? Because sometimes the critical role now may, especially with the technology and everything, may not exist or may change. So how do you identify that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, every successful succession plan is a living document, right? None of this is static.
Yes. Always in
And it
beta, right?
takes, we say that again?
Always in beta. They're
Right,
never
exactly,
finished.
right. And that's what makes it successful, right? Is regular updates. And you've got to look at these things. You may build it and it's not done. You've got to
Mhm.
continue to update kind of quarterly. My organization uses mid-year and annual performance evaluations kind of as the base scaffolding of that, right?
Nice.
So that, annually we're incorporating goals for an associate that move the mark forward in their succession readiness, right? Um, and then, like you said, you've got to have smart leaders at the top who are also dynamic. I'm lucky to work in an organization where our leaders are profoundly people focused and they themselves are highly dynamic, right? So they
I've seen
can,
a few of them, so,
yeah,
so
right. Yeah, you have. Yeah, yeah. Our company still talks about the incredible talk you gave. They still reference you back, which is
awesome. Well, I
fantastic.
like to hear that, Eric. Courtesy of
Yeah,
you.
right.
You mentioned how you kind of tie it into the performance reviews, and you're hitting all the points that I see organizations struggle with. So I see a lot of organizations give arbitrary like goals. They're just like, hey, we
Yeah.
want you to make sure you're living the company values. Like, what does that necessarily mean? So do you all have like a formulaic approach to ensure that one, the goals are actually measurable, and then to ensure that it kind of feeds into what you're talking about with the succession planning?
Yeah, absolutely. And we too have, general company goals, right?
Hmm.
We as an organization are incredibly safety focused, and that is across the company.
Good.
But
Thank God. We need.
yeah, right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Thank God.
Um, which is a novelty, actually. I'm shocked by the amount of companies that aren't tracking safety. But yeah, we have an incredible culture around building smart goals,
Mhm.
which is, I think, a symptom of our kind of legacy of really developing people. Because you've got to do foundational building to do that, right? You have to have frontline managers who think in that way to help guide their people, right? And you've got to have really trusted HR teams that understand the business and work closely with leaders, and that the leaders then come to us and ask, hey, what do you think about this? So that you can actually enact real measurable goals that move the mark for people in the organization,
Mm.
right? It takes a high level of engagement, right? I keep saying this is not easy work, but it's critical. you know.
I love that you empower the frontline managers. I mean, if we think about an organizational structure, there's very few levels that get hit as hard as they do because they're getting it from top down
Right.
and bottom, right? So, empowering them, they get to know strategy, they get to know technically what is actually needed. So how do you kind of go back? I'm assuming like surveys and stuff, but do you also like get them together? What's your approach to kind of getting that information from them?
Yeah, great question. Um, and again, it's many channels, right?
Hmm.
We've built a culture where every voice is heard, right? And even we have monthly town halls where people can submit questions to the CEO, and he will candidly and transparently answer questions. So we have this very ground up and top down approach to communication where, you know, all voices are really heard and respected. So we get that really funneled through a lot of managers. We do, of course, engagement surveys annually. We also have pulse surveys so that if we have an initiative, we want to know live, how is that being felt within the organization and our full population? Is it doing what we thought it would do? And do we need to pivot? Um, we also have built a culture where evaluations, you know, I talk about performance evaluations, and I think part of succession planning success is how you can build its touch base and updates
Hmm.
into already occurring parts or events, right? So that it doesn't stand completely outside itself, right? Part of our culture around performance evaluations is associates telling us, how's it going? How can we be better? Um, and I think a big piece that's really helped move the mark on communication across the organization are we do stay interviews where we look at
Stay interviews.
stay interviews, right?
Gotcha.
So we're looking at people who've been with us a year, 5 years, 10 years plus. What do we, and then we integrate what are the suggestions, right? How can we be a better employer? How do we be the employer of choice?
I mean, you talk about creating a holistic approach. That is a textbook right there, Eric. And it's hard, especially that state interview component. You're like, the person's there. What do you need?
Right.
Clearly, they're happy, right? We did an employee engagement survey. Everything's great. We had 98%, but it's like, how safe and how comfortable are they actually saying where they feel the gaps are? So I love
Right.
that you also take that individual approach to say, hey, we want to hear directly from you what you feel, share as much as you or as little as you feel, but we're going to take this into account, into consideration. So what would you say, like if someone's listening to this, they're like, hey Eric, this is all great, all fine, where do I start? Where would you say that someone needs to start? Maybe they don't have a large budget, for example. What would you recommend they do?
Yeah. Typically, part of that question answers itself, right? If someone's wondering if they should begin succession planning within their organization, there's a reason,
Hmm.
right? So they've either identified like maybe a talent drain or they're aware of upcoming retirements, right? Um, and whatever that concern is, I would say is the place to start, right? And then you don't need tremendous amount of money to begin the project, right? You don't need a huge budget for this. And it's really just looking at people and roles,
Hmm.
right? Whether you're going to begin with, is this people focused? Is this current people, future people, right? Or is this role specific, right? Um, and then begin asking questions. What do you do? How do you do it? What do they know? What do they need to know?
What are some of the challenges that you have encountered that you're like, hey, make sure you're aware of this obstacle that may come up for you that you could share with everyone?
Yeah, I'd say time and buy-in. Right.
Two confidence.
Right, exactly, right. Because if you're gonna do this, you might as well do it right. Um, and it takes a lot of time, right? It takes time for the people who are preparing this program.
Hmm.
It takes time from your business leaders, right? You need a lot of face time with leaders to say, what are these people like? What are your associates like? What do you need? And you need that buy-in from them to do it. And I would say too, it takes a lot of people, right?
Mm,
An individual contributor, maybe one person within the HR team, that's tough because you don't know what you don't know. So when we build maybe a successor profile or a critical role profile, it takes a lot of people to look at those and make sure that what you have is accurate. And if you're building a template, that it's broad enough that can be applied across multiple areas or
mm.
business segments or types of jobs and people, while also still addressing the critical information you need.
Yeah, you're gonna have some people hitting you up for that template, right?
Email me. I'm happy to
Yeah.
share what I got. Yeah,
They're like, "What? There's a template? Give
yeah,
me
right.
that." Eric.
Hit me up on
Awesome.
LinkedIn. I'm happy to share what I have.
No, that's awesome, man. No, you're sharing a lot of knowledge here on succession planning. I'm curious to know. I'm seeing, especially in the technical areas, technical arenas, they have talent strategists and everyone kind of looking at where the place is going. Do you have a part of the succession planning where you kind of look at talent in like colleges and all that? Do you have like partnerships that kind of assist with that?
It's a great question too. We as an organization have some
Hmm.
like funnel talent relationships. We're not a major employer in those types of roles, so it's a balance between how much does a university want us to be engaged, and how many roles do they really want us to be able to fill for them, right?
Gotcha.
Um, so that is for sure part of our uh, plan. But our organization just isn't large enough to say like we're hiring 25 entry level engineers year over year,
Mm,
right?
understood.
Um, so for our organization, we do focus more on like trade schools, um, and actually a lot of what we do are employment assistance
Yes.
organizations within
Yes.
communities, right? We partner with a lot of veteran organizations, because we again have built a culture around skills focuses. Because if you focus on an actual skill, so much is transferable, right?
Absolutely.
If you bring it down to those building blocks, and that's really the important parts. It's, can you do this, right? What can you do, and what can we train you on? And that's where we as an organization have really found great success, is these partners and community partners who say, I have these people and this is what they can do. Do you have a place for them?
That was music to my ears, Eric. I said universities, but I'm glad you also covered several other resources that are available where people are more than capable and available to be hired for roles. So like workforce retention spots, or the trade schools. These are great spaces that I feel are often kind of forgotten about by a lot of organizations. So that was. Thank you, thank you. You know what?
Yeah, of
If
course.
we say nothing else today, that was music to my ears. So I don't mind ending on that note, Eric. So before we conclude, what is one question? If there's anything you wanted to tell everyone or a question I missed, what would that be?
Yeah, I would say be dynamic with your people. That I think really fixes most people problems, particularly in the talent space, right? If you are empowering leaders to think outside the box and really engage with their associates, and you've got and have the time to really engage with their associates, that moves the mark on engagement, job satisfaction, on development, like really empowering people. Ask the questions, ask the secondary and third questions, dig in. Um, that's what makes the difference, I think.
No, I love it. Being curious. So, man, Eric,
Yeah.
I appreciate you so much. Can you tell everyone how to connect with you?
Yeah. On LinkedIn, you can find me. My last name has 11 characters, but if you can spell it, will it appear on the screen?
It's on the screen so they can
Great.
see it,
Excellent. Find me.
and I'll put it in
LDG
the notes as
Industrial.
well.
Excellent. Yeah. Happy to connect with anybody.
Yeah, they're gonna trust me. They're gonna come for that template. So, well, Eric, it's been a pleasure and an honor. I appreciate you taking some time out to talk all things succession planning with us. You shared your wisdom and knowledge. Everyone who tuned in, thank you so much for tuning in live. Everyone who will watch the replay, please know that we will respond to any comments that you put or any thoughts that you share. So, thank you so much in advance of that. And remember, until next time, to keep